My daughter wrote in the family WhatsApp group, "Everyone is invited to my graduation party, except Dad." This was after I paid for everything, including the venue for the party. I didn't comment. I just replied with a smile. What happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Josh DeLapp from New York. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I had always thought that when the day finally came for my daughter to graduate, it would feel like a culmination, not just of her hard work, but of my own years of sacrifice. I had been there through every scraped knee, every tear-filled night before exams, and every dream she dared to voice at the dinner table. From the moment she told me she was close to completing her degree, I had stepped in without hesitation to make her graduation celebration perfect. The venue wasn't cheap, but I paid for it up front. The caterer wanted a deposit, and I gave them more than they asked for, just so they could prepare a spread worthy of the occasion. I even booked a small live band, knowing she'd always loved music at family events. I imagined the smile on her face when she'd walk into the decorated hall, see her friends and family gathered, and realize it had all been arranged with love. I thought, in my quiet, fatherly way, that this was how I could show her, beyond words, how proud I was of her. Looking back, maybe I should have noticed the distance growing between us. There had been moments in recent months when she was short with me on the phone or avoided my calls altogether. I had chalked it up to her being busy, stressed about finishing her degree. Parents are often the last to believe their child could be harboring resentment against them, and I was no different. I told myself that the coolness in her tone was temporary, that once the celebration started, everything would feel warm again. I had even made plans to give a short speech during the party, just a few words about her journey and my pride in her. In my head, I rehearsed those lines during my morning walks, smiling to myself. I never imagined that the words I was preparing would be silenced before they ever left my lips. The moment it all began to unravel was so ordinary, it still surprises me how sharp the memory is. I was sitting at my desk with my coffee, the morning sunlight coming in through the blinds, when my phone pinged with a WhatsApp notification. I glanced at it without much thought. It was the family group chat, where my siblings, my cousins, and a few older relatives like to share jokes, prayer messages, and updates about family events. I expected it to be another forwarded meme. Instead, my eyes caught on the single line from my daughter. "Everyone is invited to my graduation party, except Dad." For a few seconds, I thought I had misread it. My eyes went back and forth over the words, hoping they would rearrange themselves into something else, something less cruel. But they didn't. The sentence was still there, sitting cold and unapologetic against the bright background of the chat. A strange feeling settled in my chest, part confusion, part disbelief, and part humiliation. I could see the online status flickering under several family members' names, meaning they had seen it too. There was no emoji to soften the blow, no explanation to give context. Just a public declaration that I was unwelcome at the very celebration I had financed. I could almost feel the silent shock of others in the group, the way they were probably staring at their screens, unsure whether to respond or stay quiet. In that moment, 1,000 thoughts collided in my head. Why would she do this? Had I offended her? Was this some kind of joke in poor taste? But the heaviness in my gut told me it wasn't a joke at all. It was deliberate. It was pointed. I didn't reply immediately. I sat there, fingers hovering over the keyboard of my phone, and for a fleeting second I imagined typing a paragraph demanding answers, listing every single thing I had done to make her day possible. But I didn't. Instead, I scrolled to the emojis, found the smiling face, and sent it. Just one smile, bright and simple. I could almost hear the collective mental pause of everyone in the group as my message appeared beneath hers. No confrontation, no plea for understanding, just a smile that, if they looked closely enough, might have carried a chill they couldn't quite name. It was the kind of smile that closed doors without making a sound. In that moment, something inside me shifted. I have never been a man of loud revenge or quick tempers, but I am a man who values respect. And if there is one thing I have learned, it is that disrespect in public must sometimes be answered in silence. Not because you are weak, but because you are already thinking 10 steps ahead. My mind began to work quietly, almost methodically. I knew exactly how much I had invested in her graduation party, every receipt, every bank transfer. I also knew how to undo every single one of those payments. The thought didn't come with glee, at least not at first. It came with a kind of grim clarity, the way a person feels when they realize they've been playing a game without knowing the rules had changed long ago. By the time I put my phone down, I had already decided I would not confront her about the message. There was nothing to talk about. She had spoken her truth in front of the entire family, and I would respond in a language just as clear: action. The day would come when she would feel the weight of her choice, and when it did, there would be no mistaking where it had come from. When I sent that smile emoji, I knew it was more than just a response. It was a mask. On the surface, it looked harmless, maybe even forgiving, but beneath it was a quiet declaration. I heard you, I understood you, and I would act accordingly. That single symbol was my shield in the moment, protecting me from saying something out of raw anger that could later be twisted into evidence against me. I've learned in life that words, once spoken in anger, can be replayed endlessly by those who thrive on conflict. Actions, on the other hand, speak in a different tone, cold, deliberate, and immune to reinterpretation. So I let the silence stretch. I didn't ask her why she had written what she did. I didn't explain what I had already done for her. I just kept my smile, closed the chat, and turned my attention inward. The first step was to make a list, not an emotional one, but a practical one. I pulled out my notebook from the drawer, the same one I used for household expenses, and began writing down every expense I had covered for her party. Venue, full payment, confirmed 3 weeks ago. Caterer, deposit plus a bonus for prompt service. Decoration company, custom centerpieces and balloon arrangements. Music, live band with a playlist she had personally approved. Even the photographer had been paid to document the day. I totaled the numbers at the bottom of the page, and the amount was not insignificant. That list stared back at me like a record of my own generosity, and now, my own leverage. I understood then that she had underestimated just how much power I still had over the event. Calling the venue was easier than I thought it would be. The woman who answered remembered me immediately, her voice bright and professional. I told her there had been a change in plans, that we would have to cancel. She hesitated, mentioning the no refund policy, but I had anticipated that. That's fine, I said calmly. I'd prefer to lose the deposit than go ahead with something that's no longer needed. The shift in her tone told me she understood I was serious. I didn't bother explaining further. Within minutes, the booking was void. As I hung up, I realized there was a certain peace in the simplicity of it. One call, and the grand venue she had been counting on was gone. The caterer was next. This one I handled with more care, knowing they had already purchased some of the ingredients. When the owner answered, I told him the event had been postponed indefinitely. He asked if we should reschedule, and I simply told him I would get back to him. I knew I wouldn't. The relief in my voice wasn't for him, it was for me. Every payment reversed or canceled was like reclaiming a piece of my dignity. I imagined my daughter still walking around believing everything was intact, still laughing with friends about a party she thought was secured. The gap between her reality and the truth I was quietly shaping was almost poetic. As the day went on, I made call after call. The decorator was disappointed, the band manager was slightly annoyed. The photographer tried to persuade me to keep the booking, saying dates were filling up fast. Each time, I gave the same explanation: plans have changed. That was all anyone needed to know. No anger, no drama, just a clean, sharp end to the agreements. By the time I closed my notebook, every vendor was either canceled or awaiting confirmation they would never receive. The infrastructure of the party had been dismantled completely, and she didn't even know it. The most satisfying part was how invisible it all was. On the family WhatsApp group, my daughter continued to post updates about her big day, even sharing a photo of the dress she planned to wear. Family members sent their congratulations and promised to be there. I stayed silent, liking a few comments here and there so as not to arouse suspicion. I was building a stage where the curtain would only rise on the day of the performance. And by then, it would be far too late for her to rewrite the script. The thought wasn't cruel to me. It was justice in a form that couldn't be denied. That night, as I sat in my living room with the TV murmuring in the background, I thought about the message she had sent. It wasn't just that she had excluded me. It was the way she had done it, publicly, with no attempt to speak to me privately first. I imagined her reading my silent smile in the chat and thinking she had won something, that I had swallowed the insult and moved on. The truth was, I had swallowed nothing. I had simply let it dissolve into something far sharper. There was a strange sense of control in that moment, the knowledge that I was no longer reacting to her actions, but shaping the outcome entirely. Still, I couldn't pretend there wasn't pain mixed in with the resolve. This was my daughter. I had raised her, provided for her, and celebrated her victories as if they were my own. To be told, without reason, that I wasn't welcome at her milestone event was more than an insult. It was a rewriting of our relationship. Whatever bond we had left was fractured, maybe permanently. Part of me grieved that, but another part stood taller for not allowing her to treat me as both a bank and a stranger. My money could not be good enough for her if my presence was not. That was a boundary I would enforce, even if it meant she would hate me for it. By the time I went to bed, the plan was complete. Every detail had been handled, every payment reversed, every vendor informed. All that was left was to wait. I didn't feel the need to tell anyone in the family what I had done. Let them arrive on the day of the party and discover it themselves. Let the confusion turn to panic, and the panic to understanding. My phone would ring, the messages would pour in, but I had already decided. I would not pick up. I would not explain myself. The silence would speak for me, louder than any confrontation could. The day before the party had a strange, almost electric stillness to it. It was the kind of stillness that exists just before a thunderstorm, when the air feels charged, but no one is quite aware of the shift. My daughter was still riding high on the anticipation, posting countdown updates on her social media, and chatting in the family WhatsApp group about how she couldn't wait to see everyone. She had no idea that the stage she thought she was stepping onto had already been dismantled plank by plank. I watched the updates come in, my phone lighting up with her excitement, and I found it almost surreal. This wasn't the same girl who had told the entire family that her father wasn't welcome. This was a version of her who thought control was still in her hands. I let her keep believing that. I spent most of that day at home, keeping my movements simple and my thoughts contained. I made myself a slow breakfast, lingering over the coffee as though the day had no particular purpose. In truth, it was one of the most deliberate days I'd had in a long time. Every moment of calm was a kind of preparation for what was coming. I knew there was no turning back now. Even if, by some miracle, she called to apologize, the arrangements were beyond saving. The venue was locked in darkness. The caterer had scrubbed her name from their schedule, and the decorations that were supposed to arrive that morning were still in storage. The party, as she envisioned it, was a ghost before it ever existed. By early afternoon, I got a call from my younger sister, who had always been more observant than the rest. "Are you excited for tomorrow?" she asked, her tone light but edged with something else, maybe curiosity. I could tell she had picked up on the lack of enthusiasm in my replies to the family group. I told her I wasn't attending, keeping my voice flat. She hesitated, then asked if it was because of the message in the group chat. I said, yes, and nothing more. She pressed, asking if I was still helping with the event. I could feel the corners of my mouth tug upward, but I didn't give her the satisfaction of an answer. I simply told her that plans change, and sometimes people have to live with the results of their choices. That ended the call quickly. I went for a walk in the late afternoon, partly to clear my head, partly to enjoy the simple pleasure of knowing the day was mine alone. The air was warm, the streets familiar, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was rushing to meet anyone's expectations. I thought about how often I had bent over backward for family events, rearranging my own life to make things easier for others. Somewhere along the way, those gestures had stopped being appreciated and had become expected, owed, even. And when someone starts to believe they are owed your effort, your sacrifice, they stop treating it as a gift. That's when the disrespect begins. This wasn't just about the party. This was about every silent compromise I had made, every time I had been told, in words or in actions, that I wasn't enough. Back at home, I found myself imagining the conversations that would happen tomorrow. People would arrive, dressed and smiling, only to be greeted by locked doors and a vacant parking lot. There would be confusion at first, calls to the venue manager, maybe even to the caterer, until it all unraveled. The whispers would start. Did you know about this? Who canceled? Why didn't anyone say anything? And somewhere in that growing chaos, the truth would begin to form in their minds. Some would call me petty. Some would call me justified. But every single one of them would remember that moment, and so would she. The lesson wouldn't come from me telling her she was wrong. It would come from the void her actions had created. As the evening approached, I made no preparations for the next day. No alarm was set. No clothes laid out. No speech rehearsed. Instead, I chose a movie I'd been meaning to watch and set out a few snacks, deciding that tomorrow would be a day for myself. There was something deeply satisfying about the reversal. While they scrambled and panicked, I would be in my living room, remote in hand, completely undisturbed. The world outside could spin in whatever chaos it wanted. My world would be steady. That kind of peace, I realized, comes only when you stop letting others write your role in their story. Before bed, I checked the family group one last time. The messages were still filled with cheerful anticipation. My daughter had posted a final reminder for everyone to be there on time, followed by a photo of her graduation cap and gown. She had added a caption about how tomorrow would be a day to remember forever. I looked at the words for a long moment, wondering if she'd still believe them by the end of it. Without replying, I put my phone face down on the table. Some memories are shaped by joy, others by consequence, and this one would belong firmly to the latter. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Morning came without urgency for me. I woke naturally, no alarm, no reason to rush. The sun was already spilling into the room, casting long stripes of gold across the floor. Somewhere across town, my daughter was probably already dressed, hair and makeup in place, thinking about the speeches she might hear and the compliments she would receive. The irony was delicious in its quiet way. While her mind was full of celebration, mine was content with stillness. I brewed my coffee slowly, savoring the smell, and settled into my chair with my favorite TV show queued up. It felt like any other day, except for the knowledge that by mid-morning, my phone would be on fire. I imagined the scene unfolding at the venue. Guests arriving, exchanging greetings, complimenting outfits. Some would wander toward the entrance expecting music and chatter, only to find the heavy double doors locked. At first, there would be polite confusion. Perhaps a few jokes about running on African time, or the staff being late. People would try to peer through the windows, expecting to see tables set and decorations hanging. Instead, they would see nothing but empty space. The first phone calls would go to my daughter, who would assure them it must be a mistake, that she'd call the manager immediately. That's when the tension would start to climb. The calls to the venue manager wouldn't go well. The staff would explain, perhaps reluctantly, that the booking had been canceled. They might even add that it was done by the person who made the original payment, me. I could picture her face as that realization sank in, the way her confidence would falter. Anger would be her first reaction, followed by disbelief. She would think there had to be some way to fix it, that maybe she could pay on the spot to reopen the place. But vendors aren't magicians. Once the slot is gone, it's gone. The hall wasn't waiting for her anymore. The caterer's absence would be the next blow. Guests expecting trays of food would instead find themselves standing in the heat with nothing to nibble on. Some would leave quietly, others would linger to see the drama play out. I imagined one or two relatives whispering about the group chat message, connecting the dots faster than others. My daughter, still trying to salvage the day, would frantically call the decorator, only to hear that the arrangements had been canceled weeks ago. Piece by piece, the truth would become undeniable. This wasn't a scheduling error or a coincidence. This was deliberate. Meanwhile, My phone began to vibrate just as I had predicted. First, it was my daughter. I let it ring. Then my sister. Then, two cousins in quick succession. I didn't even glance at the screen. The calls went straight to voicemail. Messages began arriving one after the other, some short and panicked, others long and dripping with accusation. One voice note from my daughter was especially sharp. "I can't believe you would do this to me. You ruined everything. Everyone is here, and they're all looking at me like I'm a fool. Do you know what this means for me?" I didn't play it twice. I didn't need to. The words weren't for understanding. They were for release, and I wasn't about to give her that satisfaction. What struck me most as the calls kept coming was how predictable it all was. People who had been silent when I was humiliated in the group chat were suddenly vocal now that the tables had turned. My decision to stay home was being treated as a greater offense than her decision to exclude me in the first place. That's how family works sometimes. The initial wound gets brushed aside, and the retaliation becomes the headline. But I knew my truth, and I had no need to justify it. In my mind, I wasn't punishing her. I was refusing to sponsor my own erasure. I settled deeper into my chair, flipping through TV channels until I found something lighthearted. Outside my window, the day moved on as though nothing unusual was happening. It was almost jarring to think of the two realities running in parallel, my calm and their chaos. Somewhere, my daughter was scrambling, her voice growing sharper with each call, her composure unraveling in front of friends and relatives. The image didn't bring me joy exactly, but it did bring me closure. It was the physical embodiment of a truth I'd carried for years. When you strip away entitlement, you reveal the foundation someone has built their relationships on. By early afternoon, the calls had slowed. Maybe people had given up. Maybe they were busy trying to throw together an alternative celebration. I didn't care. The silence felt good. It felt earned. I got up, made myself lunch, and sat by the window while eating. In the distance, I could hear the faint hum of traffic, the occasional bark of a dog, life continuing without pause. I thought about how, for once, I hadn't let myself be pulled into fixing a problem I didn't create. That was a victory in itself. Evening brought a final wave of messages. Short, clipped, and bitter. Some accused me outright. Others tried to guilt me into explaining. I replied to none of them. My role in the day was over before it began, and I intended to keep it that way. I switched off my phone entirely and let the world exist without me for the rest of the night. Sleep came easily, without the usual tug of resentment or worry. The storm had passed, at least for me. For them, it was still raging. The morning after the failed party, my phone was already buzzing before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. I had switched it back on after a night of deliberate silence, and the notifications came flooding in. There were unread messages in the family group chat, dozens of them, ranging from angry to sympathetic and everything in between. My daughter's posts were the loudest, filled with pointed accusations about how I had humiliated her in front of everyone and destroyed the most important day of her life. Her words were designed for maximum impact, crafted to make me the villain of the story before anyone had the chance to remember her own public declaration. But I knew enough about human nature to understand that the first voice to speak often gets the most sympathy, at least until the details start to leak out. As I scrolled through the messages, I noticed the patterns. The same relatives who had been conspicuously silent when she excluded me were now the ones expressing outrage at my pettiness. They didn't mention the group chat message. They spoke only about the locked venue, the absent caterer, and the guests left standing in the heat. Their outrage was selective, their memory conveniently short. A few, though, wrote directly to me in private, asking if it was true that I had canceled everything. They wanted to know my side, as though this were some kind of family trial. I didn't give them one. My silence was not because I lacked justification. It was because I no longer cared to convince people who had already shown me how quickly they could ignore disrespect when it wasn't aimed at them. Later in the day, I received a message from my eldest brother, who had always been something of the family's unofficial mediator. He asked me to meet him for coffee so we could clear the air. I agreed, knowing full well that his real goal wasn't to understand me, but to nudge me into apologizing so the family could move past the discomfort. When we met, He wasted no time. "You know, what you did, that was extreme," he said, stirring his coffee in slow circles. I didn't interrupt him. He went on about how families should be able to talk things out, how a party was no place for revenge. When he finally paused, I simply said, "Families should also be able to show respect without being forced." His face tightened at that, but he didn't argue the point. The truth has a way of ending conversations, even when people don't want to admit it. Word of the incident had spread beyond our immediate relatives. Friends of the family, even a few distant acquaintances, reached out with their opinions. Some sent messages of quiet support, admitting they would have done the same in my position. Others were less subtle, accusing me of ruining a milestone out of spite. I noticed that those who judged me most harshly were often the same people who had no problem attending events where I was excluded, so long as the food and entertainment were good. Hypocrisy tends to have a short memory and a loud voice. Still, the more I listened, or rather, the more I read, the more I realized that the fallout wasn't just about the party. This was a reshuffling of alliances, a redrawing of lines in the sand. My daughter, unsurprisingly, didn't contact me directly after her first wave of angry messages. Instead, she took to social media, writing a long post about toxic family members and how blood doesn't give anyone the right to control your life. I didn't respond. I knew she was speaking to an audience, not to me. The likes and comments rolled in from her friends, most of whom had no idea what had actually happened. Let them believe whatever story she wanted to tell. My truth didn't need their validation. In fact, the less I tried to defend myself publicly, the more certain family members started quietly remembering the original message that started it all. By midweek, the family group chat had shifted from outrage to uneasy silence. The initial storm of accusations had burned itself out, replaced by awkward check-ins and unrelated posts meant to move the conversation away from the incident. But some wounds don't heal just because people stop talking about them. I knew this would linger. The next time we all gathered, whenever that would be, there would be a thin film of tension over every conversation, a hesitance in certain greetings, and a watchfulness in the way people measured their words. That was fine by me. Sometimes discomfort is the only reminder people need that boundaries exist for a reason. I noticed a change in myself during those days after the party. For years, I had operated under the belief that being a good father meant enduring almost anything, swallowing disrespect for the sake of keeping the peace. But the locked venue had shifted something inside me. I realized that peace built on one-sided sacrifice isn't really peace at all. It's quiet resentment dressed in polite clothing. By refusing to fund an event where I was publicly unwelcome, I had done more than make a point to my daughter. I had made a point to myself. I would never again pay for my own absence. One evening, about a week after the failed party, I ran into a cousin at the grocery store. She lowered her voice and told me she didn't agree with how I handled it, but she understood why I did it. Then she admitted something I hadn't expected. You know, she's still not telling people about that group chat message. If they knew the whole story, it'd be a different conversation. That told me everything I needed to know. Even my critics knew the truth would shift the narrative. And that was enough. I didn't need a public vindication. The people who mattered already saw the cracks in her story. By the end of the second week, the noise had faded almost completely. Life was returning to its usual rhythm, though I could feel the subtle changes in the way certain family members interacted with me. Some were cooler, some more cautious, and a few surprisingly warmer, as though respecting me more now that I had drawn a line. My daughter, however, remained distant. We hadn't spoken since before the party, and I didn't reach out. I knew any conversation now would be about her feelings, not mine, and I wasn't ready to have a one-sided discussion. What surprised me most wasn't the anger, or the gossip, or even the fractured relationships. It was the sense of calm I felt in the middle of it all. For the first time in a long while, I had acted on my own terms without bending to the pressure of keeping appearances. I had faced the consequences, absorbed the criticism, and still slept soundly at night. There was power in that kind of quiet resolve, power I had been giving away for years without realizing it. The fallout had come and gone, but the lesson remained firmly in place. Weeks had passed since the day of the locked venue. and though the noise had quieted, the ripples were still moving through the family in ways I could feel more than see. I would walk into a family gathering, rare as those had become, and notice the careful way people spoke to me now. Some leaned in closer, their tone almost conspiratorial, as though wanting to show quiet support without drawing attention. Others kept their distance, unwilling to confront me directly, but still carrying the silent judgment in their eyes. It was an odd balance, being both respected and resented at the same time, but I realized I preferred it to being dismissed. Respect, even reluctant respect, was better than being invisible in my own family's celebrations. My relationship with my daughter remained frozen in place, as though the day of her graduation had built an unspoken wall neither of us was willing to climb over. She hadn't reached out to apologize, and I hadn't extended a hand to start the conversation. Some people might call that stubbornness, but I saw it differently. I had spent years being the one to bridge gaps, to smooth over tensions, to bend just enough so that others could feel comfortable without ever addressing the real problem. This time, I let the space stand. I wanted her to sit with what had happened, to feel the discomfort of her own choice. Growth doesn't happen in the comfort of avoidance. It happens when the consequences of our actions are allowed to exist without immediate rescue. Every now and then, I would replay that original WhatsApp message in my mind, not to feed my anger, but to remind myself of how deliberate her words had been. Everyone is invited except Dad. There had been no hesitation, no private warning, no attempt at sparing me embarrassment. She had chosen the public sting, and with it, she had chosen the public consequences. I wasn't proud of how things had ended that day, but I was certain it was necessary. The older I get, the more I understand that being a parent is not the same as being a perpetual doormat. There are moments when love must take the form of refusal, when caring for someone means refusing to enable the behavior that harms both of you. I also began to notice a subtle shift in my own sense of peace. For years, I had carried an unspoken anxiety about family events, what would be expected of me, how I would be perceived, whether I was doing enough. That anxiety had always been tied to the fear of being excluded, of being seen as less important. But now, having faced exclusion head-on and refused to finance it, I realized I no longer feared it. If someone didn't want me there, so be it. What I would not tolerate again was being asked to pay for the privilege of being unwanted. That boundary was no longer negotiable. Friends who heard about the incident in passing often asked if I regretted it. My answer was always the same: no. Regret belongs to those who act without thought, who lash out in moments of anger and later wish they had taken a different approach. I had acted with clarity, with intention, and with a purpose I still believed in. Did it hurt? Of course. Did it cost me something in my relationship with my daughter? Absolutely. But relationships built on one-sided respect are fragile to begin with. If mine with her was so easily fractured, perhaps it was never as strong as I had believed. That realization was painful, but also freeing. There were moments, quiet, late-night moments, when I thought about the years ahead and whether we would ever repair what had been broken. I didn't hope for a perfect reconciliation. I had long stopped believing in that kind of fairy tale ending. What I did hope for was understanding, the kind that comes slowly, often years later, when someone looks back and finally sees the lesson for what it was. Maybe one day she would understand that my refusal to be erased was not a rejection of her, but a defense of my own dignity. Maybe one day she would see that being a parent sometimes means drawing lines so the next generation knows where they stand. Until then, I was content to live with the silence. The rest of the family eventually moved on, at least outwardly. Other events filled the calendar, other dramas took center stage. But every so often, I would catch a look across the room, or hear a carefully worded comment, and I knew the locked venue still lived in their minds. I didn't mind. Let it live there. Let it be a reminder that generosity without respect is a well that runs dry. If my stand had taught even one person in the family that lesson, then it had been worth it. On a warm evening not long ago, I found myself sitting on the porch, watching the sun set in slow gradients of orange and gold. My phone buzzed on the table beside me, but I didn't reach for it. I didn't need to. Whatever was on the other end could wait. In that moment, I felt the full weight of what I had chosen, not just the act of canceling the party, but the act of reclaiming my own self-respect. For years, I had poured myself into making others happy without asking if they valued it. That era was over. The cost of my presence, my effort, and my support was no longer just money. It was mutual respect. And if that price was too high for anyone, they were free to go without. I leaned back in my chair as the last light faded, a quiet satisfaction settling over me. The world had not ended because I said no. My worth had not diminished because I set a boundary. And somewhere out there, my daughter was living with the memory of a day she thought she controlled, only to find out that control is not the same as power. I had taken mine back, and I wasn't about to give it away again. Sometimes the hardest part of family drama isn't the fight. It's standing firm when everyone tells you to back down. I refused to fund my own humiliation, and it changed how I see respect, boundaries, and love. What about you? If you were in my position, would you have done the same? Share your thoughts below. This is a conversation that goes deeper than one party. See you soon in the next story.